The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. All day long, Jesus had spoken to the crowd in parables. When evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." And leaving the crowd behind, they took them in the boat just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are drowning?" Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still got no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who is this then, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The gospel inspired by God. Did you ever ask yourself the question, what in God's name am I doing on this planet? I don't fit in here at all, I must have hung a left instead of a right when I was approaching the Milky Way galaxy and I arrived on planet Earth by mistake. People in this place are crazy. What the hell am I doing here? I'm sure Jesus must have asked himself that question many, many times. What am I doing here? This can't be right. So, obviously, Jesus is a multi-dimensional being, and he's moving seamlessly between dimensions. So here he is in today's story. He'd been preaching all day to the crowds. They bring him into a boat and they're going across the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee is subject to these really horrendous sudden storms, windstorms. It's quite common there actually. And he's in the back of the boat and he's fast asleep. And the boat has been thrown all over the place, and the guys are screaming out, "We're drowning, we're dying, we're dying." And they wake him up and say, "Aren't you concerned that we're dying?" And he kind of wakes up, and he's just been in and out of different dimensions, and all of a sudden he says, "I'm back. I can't believe it." And then he calms the wind and the sea. The truth is, every single one of us is a multi-dimensional being. All of us exist at so many different levels simultaneously. But we don't understand that in the West, or even in Western Christianity. In the Hindu model, there's the belief system of at least 7 levels of existence, 7 levels of body. That there's this physical body we inhabit that's vibrating between infrared and ultraviolet, between 400 and 700 nanometers, that we take to be the reality. And then there's an etheric body, an energy body, of which the physical body is simply a hard copy, a printout, and that's vibrating at a higher frequency. And so this is what's responsible for the aura that some people can see. There's a third level, which is the astral body, vibrating at a still higher level. And it's the body you inhabit when you're dreaming at night and you're floating off into different spaces. There's the fourth level called the mental body, which is the place of ratiocination and logic and wisdom. There's a fifth level, which is where you inhabit your psychic abilities, where you're clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, where you have, telekinesis available to you, or telepathy, or, precognition, all these gifts. That's a part of yourself. There's another level, which is Atman, or individual consciousness, little splink of consciousness. And then the 7th level is Source itself, or Brahman, or Brahmanic consciousness. So we exist at all these levels simultaneously. But for whatever reason, we tend to identify with this physical space. Except occasionally, we blunder into the other places. And we do it actually on a regular basis. Like every night when you dream, you're actually going into a different level of the self, where the laws of physics are very different from the physical world. And so, for instance, occasionally in a dream, you're flying, so you're not subject to the law of gravity, in that place. The laws of causation are very, very different. Time doesn't matter a damn in that other space. I had a dream a few nights ago where my grandfather, who died in 1956, had a little child on his knee, and the little child on his knee was my newest grandnephew. He's 2 years old, and he lives in Holland. My grandfather was never in Holland in his life. He's dead since 1956. This little kid was born in 2014, and there they are, 60 or 70 years apart, and time doesn't seem to make a difference, or location doesn't make a difference. I remember having a dream just a few weeks ago where I was back in my childhood bedroom in 1957, and I was with Seamus and Porrick in our bunk beds. And so in this blink of an eye, I had traveled 6,000 miles to the east, and 57 years back in time, and it just happened like that. So we all experience this ability, to move into different states of the selves. The question becomes is it possible for us to cross-fertilize these levels of reality and to import abilities from one level into the other level? Because that's what Jesus seemed to be able to do. And several other great gurus seem to be able to do this. So to be able to stand up in a boat that's rocking wildly around and say to the sea, calm, be still, and for the whole thing just to settle itself down, and for the windstorm just to die down instantaneously. So is this just, are they making this stuff up? It didn't really happen, but they're ascribing all these abilities to him. But you get many, many instances throughout history of other people who seem to be able to put aside the laws of physics. There's a church down in Cupertino, St. Joseph's Cupertino. There's a church there, and it's called after a saint I think he lived in about the 1600s, called Joseph of Cupertino. And Joseph of Cupertino, it is well demonstrated, thousands of witnesses saw this guy on a regular basis levitate, some literally to the height of the top of the trees on occasion, that he levitated on a regular basis. So what happens when you can learn to import abilities from one dimension of who you are into other dimensions of who you are? That's what the great, gurus and mystics and avatars seem to be able to do. Now, there's a famous Russian scientist just a few years ago that created a typology of civilizations. And his belief system is that in the universe out there, there are what he called type 1 civilizations who have learned how to totally manage the resources of their entire planet, and who are able to, control the weather, completely control their weather. And they're controlling the resources of the entire planet, but they're doing it in a very sustainable fashion. He called those a type 1 civilization. He said there's a type 2 civilization who are able to do that for their entire solar system. Not just for the planet on which they live, but for all the other planets around the sun, of which their planet circumambulates. And they can, they're able to use the resources for the entire solar system and to do it sustainably and to control the weather patterns for all of the planets and the sun in their system. And there's a type 3 civilization, he believed, that could actually do that for their entire galaxy. That they could access the resources of an entire galaxy, control them sustainably, and be able to moderate the climate of those. He was asked in an interview one time, what type are we, human beings? He said, we're a type 0. And he said the movement from type 0 to type 1 is a very, very dangerous transition. Because as you learn to utilize the resources of an entire planet and to control the weather patterns, you run the danger of destroying the entire experiment. Now, it seems to me that some of these great avatars had learned to do that in a very, very non-threatening way, that they could learn to import abilities from one level or one state of consciousness or one dimension into others and cross-fertilize them. So it's not that they were setting aside the laws of the universe. If you ask me, do I believe in miracles? I would have to say to you, well, when you say a miracle, do you mean that God temporarily sets aside the laws of the cosmos in order to indulge the prayers of holy people? If that's what you mean, I don't believe in miracles. But if by a miracle you believe that the universe is a much, much more complex place than we've realized, and the laws of the universe are much, much, much subtler. And when you learn how to really know and use the laws of the universe, miracles happen, not because they're contravening the laws, but you've understood the laws at a far, far deeper level. Did electricity exist before Benjamin Franklin discovered it? Yeah. So what did it look like? It was there at that stage, but we weren't able to understand the electromagnetic spectrum at that level and to utilize it for a whole bunch of reasons. So there are abilities out there that are actually built in to the fabric even of our physical cosmos, which we still haven't learned to understand. And if we were to understand them and to utilize them and to go into a society that had not understood them and had not utilized them, we'd look like gods to them. So when human beings from more advanced civilizations encounter human beings from primitive civilizations, the primitives regard them as gods because they're capable of doing things that the primitive people is not capable of doing. And you get a whole phenomenon then which is called the cargo cults, where there's a worship set up among the primitive people of the visitors from outer space, the people who came in airplanes. It happened during World War II, in islands in Micronesia, when Japanese air people and American airmen landed on these islands. It developed what were called the cargo cults. These people saw these gods come in on these flying machines, bring all kinds of goodies to them, cargo, and then engage in all these kinds of ritualistic drills, parading with these things over their shoulders. And when the war was ended and the Americans went back home and the Japanese went back home, these people continued these rituals, hoping that they'd persuade these gods to come back and bring some more cargo with them. So just how much more is there to even the physical universe in which we live, such that if we were more advanced beings spiritually, we could be harvesting those abilities. I believe personally that this is the course of evolution. Evolution will confer on the leading species the ability, to dig deeper into the cosmos in which they live, and utilize particular gifts. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever seen Kirlian photography. If you take a photograph, say for instance, of a leaf, and then you cut off part of the leaf and you take a photograph at a Kirlian level, you'll still see the energetic template of the part that's missing. Because at some level, in some dimension, the leaf still exists. Its ability to articulate itself or reproduce itself at some level etherically still exists. So I believe that even if planet Earth itself were to be destroyed, or even if the human species were to wipe itself out in some kind of a nuclear holocaust, there's an energy template, there's a dimension of the species that would continue to exist and that would just manifest itself in a different form, presumably even a more advanced form than the one that we just destroyed. So this, I think, is the frustration of Jesus this morning, that he's dealing with people who do not fully realize either the mystery of God or the mystery of being a human being. So I think that obviously any civilization that has survived that evolutionary leap has learned, how to make their moral evolution commensurate with their technological advances. Hopefully, yeah. They wouldn't have reached that place if they hadn't. They would have destroyed themselves in the interim. So hopefully, having learned that lesson really, really deeply and experientially, they wouldn't make the same mistake as they're transitioning from a type 1 to a type 2, or a type 2 to a type 3. But it's that initial transition into that kind of power and that technology. That's what we're wrestling with as a human species right now, and it's iffy. Exactly. So for me, Homo spiritualis is that, that bifurcation point where, Homo sapiens sapiens either goes into what I call Homo sociopathicus, that will continue business as usual and warfare as usual, and it'll wipe itself out. Or Homo spiritualis, that's going to, transcend and either just operate at a higher level than the merely physical. And so that energetic blueprint now manifests in a different form that has transcended the greed and the aggression of the sense of separate identity, that we'll regard ourselves as, everything is brother and sister to me, whether it's a banana slug, an oak tree, or a human being. Because it's all stored in the Akashic records. Yeah. Everything is recorded. So it's only a question of, can we blunder into the mindset that allows us to access that kind of information? On a kind of a more kind of a difficult level, I hear reports fairly regularly of people with psychic abilities who are helping police find missing persons. And in many instances, when the psychic goes to the police and says, I have this real strong intuition that you're going to find the body in this particular spot, and they go out and they find the body, and then the person gets arrested, because the only way you could have known this, you're the putative murderer. And people being dragged through all kinds of interrogations because they have these kind of psychic powers. Do you ever wonder why every time you do laundry, there's always at least one sock missing? Always one sock missing. Yeah? And then you go back a few days later and sit inside. place that you looked 15, 16 times, and I was back. Yeah. It kind of went in and out of this physical existence for. So I think there are sock fairies who specialize in just taunting us by removing pieces for a few days. Absolutely. And you can look the same place, you go back to the same place 15 times, it's not there, and you go back the 16th time and it's sitting right in front of you. Oh yeah, it depends on how and why they're controlling their environment. So if we use the word control and utilize the resources, we think that we're just exploiting. But if you're at a higher level of consciousness and you still have volunteered for some kind of an incarnational experience, then your relationship with the resources changes. It means you can manage them, but you're not exploiting them. But at the same sense, you're still managing to kind of have much more influence on the physical environment in which you find yourself. But not that you're destroying it or have no respect for it. Yeah. Because it's interesting, in the Hebrew scriptures, the word that's used, chapter 3 of the book of Genesis, where God, having created everything, and Adam and Eve, and he now gives them, control over nature. The word that's used in the Hebrew is, he gave them radah. And radah in Hebrew has three meanings. It means to exploit, to control, or to have stewardship for, or responsibility for. So in the third sense then, responsibility for means that you have the not just the power, but the duty to look after everything. So I think, for instance, that in the story just before that, where God asks Adam and Eve to name the animals. And we think that naming the animals they went around and saw this thing with this long neck, and they said, wonder what we call that. Banana slug? No, it doesn't sound right. Alligator? No. How about giraffe? Oh yeah, that sounds good. That's the kind of onomatopoeic. Yeah, let's use giraffe. And then they go around, they start naming all the other animals, just putting identity tags on them. And that's not the meaning of it at all. In the Hebrew scriptures and in Gaelic, in Celtic mythology, to name something means to come into relationship with its essence. And so the real name of anything, I believe, is the song that the soul sang as it winged its way into incarnation. And if you know somebody's name, you're in contact with their soul, with their essence. And that what Adam and Eve were being asked to do was, if you can name these creatures, it means you understand their essence. And now they're not there to be exploited or utilized. They're there as your helpers, which was the phrase that was used earlier in the same passage. God made helpers for them. So they're there as part of a team, not to be exploited or controlled in the sense that they're just a resource. So I would imagine that a type 2 or a type 3 civilization that has the ability to control its environment is not doing it out of a sense of exploitation, but of stewardship and of connection to the essence of everything that exists around them. I think that's part of the moral evolution, the ability to perspective, or to see the world from the perspective of all other life forms. I have this vision that at some stage on planet Earth there will be an international conference going on for several years of all the species on the planet, and each species will get one representative. We get one representative as the human family. The birds get a representative. The reptiles get a representative. The mammals get a representative. But that there'll be some kind of a meeting of the minds where we can literally adopt the perspectives of all these life forms and then create a way of being on the planet that honors the needs of all these species. So I have this theory about the wind that the wind is the most powerful musical instrument of all, and we think that the wind only makes noises when it meets an obstacle, and that the noises we hear are just wind meeting obstacles. But it's not that. It is wind turning everything into a musical instrument. I remember last year when I was at home in Ireland, Seamus was building a new house, and we this pipe scaffolding up. And there was 5 or 6 of us working, and the scaffolding is going up about 30 feet. And in the course of the day, I hear this beautiful music. And there's a whole bunch of guys working, so I thought somebody has, his radio's on to some station. And his son, Seamus Og, I said to him at some stage, what's that music? It's very, very nice. And he said, what music? I said, don't you have your radio or something on? He says, no, I don't. And I realized it was the pipe scaffolding, the wind coming through the scaffolding was creating this extraordinary music. It sounded like Enya without the words to it. I suddenly realized it was just pipes were creating this extraordinary music. And so what the wind does, the wind really is basically a musical conductor. It just, it entices the music out of every obstacle it meets, whether they're the reeds on the riverbank, or kind of pipes, or kind of a broken piece of gutter. Everything is making music under the baton of the wind. So it's highly intelligent. Yeah. In fact, it's the word that's used interchangeably in the scriptures. Wind, breath, and life are the same word as spirit in many languages. In Hebrew, the word is ruach. It can mean breath, life, spirit. In Greek, it's called pneuma. Swahili, we call it pepo. Hindus call it prana. And it sneaks into English even as inspiration and expiration. To inspire literally means to take the spirit in, or to breathe in, or to be alive, or to be creative. And to expire means to let go of spirit, or breathe out, or die. And so there's this cycle of life and death just in the breathing process already.